In Module 2, you'll hear from Kenneth, John, and a new subject matter expert, Domenico Ragusio. Dom is the Chief Technical Officer with IBM Security in Italy and will cover types of cybersecurity attacks, the impact of these attacks, and the types of actors and their motives. You will also hear from Javier Portugues Mora from an IBM Security Operations Center. Javier describes a day in the life of a security analyst as they address cyber attacks in real time. You will also be asked to download and read the Poneman Institute's 4th annual study on the Cyber Resilient Organization. Let's get started. In this video, you will learn to describe who the primary actors are in cybercrime and their motives.
So let's take a quick look into the type of the actors and their motive in order to perform cybercrime or hacking into technology systems. There is a lot of actors, but we could summarize 4 of them. First of all, we have the hackers. Those hackers could be paid or not. For example, private organizations could pay a group of hackers to hack a company and extract their database for, I don't know, to obtain intellectual property, for example. And actually, that's happened in the past. There is something called the Operation Aurora that I will recommend some further reading regarding that operation. Then we have the internal users. These could be something that is performed intentional or not. I mean, if you are working in your company and you try or you forward a set of confidential documents into your personal email, just for go to your home and start working on the night on those documents, that's something that is not necessarily intentional or is not an attack from an intentional perspective, but it's an attack. I mean, you shouldn't forward or you shouldn't use confidential documents outside your secure company network. You are not aware of that, and that's probably because you don't have the training, you don't have the administrative control, the policy or the procedure that will let you know that you shouldn't done that. But that's the difference between the internal user with intentional motive or not. For example, if you go to your company and you intentionally go and plug a USB drive into your computer and execute a virus, that's something intentional. But the thing is, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to understand if the internal user have the motive or not to perform those malicious actions. Then we have hacktivism. Hacktivism is something similar that the hackers, but the thing with hacktivism is normally nobody pays to those hacktivism to perform attacks. For example, DDoS campaigns are performed to a lot of states, a lot of nations, in order to make pressure for one particular decision. For example, we're going to explore a couple of Singapore hacks that a group of hacktivisms perform on the government websites, because the Singapore government are implementing new compliance and new regulations into the internet. So that's a quick example of the hacktivism. And governments, we talked before about governments, their intentions, mostly their intentions are not financial, but they have intentions. They normally want to spy. They normally want to understand what's happening in each country from the inside, from the confidential data that they are managing. So that's another actor. And what are their motives? Here's just a quick example of the motives or some motivation that the attackers may have. One motivation is just play, demonstrate that they have the capacity, they have the capabilities for hack into a secure system. They sometimes try to gain money. They try to make some money on their scams or on their hacks. That's something that could be categorized or could be aligned with the criminal organizations. Political and action or political actions and movements. Sorry, if a group of people wants to perform an attack into a government, in most of the occasion that attack came because they have a motivation, they have a political motivation, they have a movement to make it clear to the government that they are here, they want something, they are not agree with some policy or something like that. So there is a political motivation over there. One interesting motivation is hire me, is I will demonstrate you that I could hack you, I could enter into your secure system, I could find holes into your security system, in order for you to understand that I am good, that I am a good professional, well, a good hacker, a good technician, or a good guy with technical skills that could be hired into your organization, into your government to fix or to patch those security holes.
In this video, you will learn to describe and name the major cybercrime and hacker organizations that are now operating worldwide.
Of organizations, hacker organization, crime organization, and hacktivism organization. For example, we have the Fancy Bears. That organization was vinculated with U.S. election hack, DCC hack into, well, the Hillary Clinton party, the office that managed information from the Democratic Party. Then we have, for example, the Lizard Group. That's actually a pretty good image here. We have Anonymous, obviously. We have LuxSec. We have the Syrian Electronic Army. We have Guardians of the Peace. That's another hacker group that will or cause some leaks on Sony. I don't know if you remember that, but a couple of years ago, Sony create or film a movie regarding North Korea dictator Kim Jong-un, and Guardians of Peace hacked Sony in order to prevent the release of the movie. So that's the story behind Guardians of Peace. And then we have another set of actors. Those are government actors. For example, we have obviously the Taylor Access Operation from the United States. We have the National Security Agency, NSA. We have Unit 61398 from Israel. We have the Unit 82,000 from China. So we have a lot of people. We have a lot of actors in the security, on the cybersecurity field, in cybersecurity arena. And obviously, we don't have here business actors. We don't have the security operation centers. We don't have the companies that are just part of the cybersecurity ecosystem at this stage. What's next? Probably the espionage from countries, from different actors will be increased. Advanced malware, we will have a lot of new malware. We will have a lot of more advanced malware. There is a couple of new malware examples that we already have, and we are exploring. We are trying to understand how that malware works. That actually didn't use the normal methods to hide, didn't use any common methods, any known method to deliver or to exploit vulnerabilities into the system. We're going to have new technologies. We're going to have new smartphones, new operative systems, new devices that will be part of the technological ecosystem. So as soon as we have a new technology, there are new security bugs, security vulnerabilities that we need to carry out in order to protect those assets, in order to protect that technology. We're going to have a lot of hacking, a lot of advanced persistent threats. We're going to talk about advanced persistent threats in the next videos, but we are going to have a lot hacking in the next following year. And we are going to have, we have actually a human gap. The human needs to understand that the cybersecurity is something important. They need to care about the data that they are having on the internet, they are having on their personal devices. So the human gap will be increased, but that's something that we need to deal with and work with the users to decrease the gap.
In this video, you will learn to describe the major different types of cyber attacks and the impacts they have had.
We're going to talk about different types of attacks and their impact. We're going to show quick examples, real-world examples. For example, we have the Sony attack. The LuxSec group on 2011 goes to Sony and hack their PlayStation network system, and they leak a lot of information regarding credit cards, regarding accounts on their PlayStation network. We have the Singapore attacks. We talked about before these attacks, but in simple words, there is a lot of hackers that send attacks into websites, not just government websites, but also banks and companies on Singapore to protest for some policies, some laws that the Singapore government are passing. On 2014, we have a lot of attacks. We have the LinkedIn attack. Actually, that attack, that leak was something pretty important. We have eBay, we have Home Depot, Ubisoft. We have a lot of governments. On 2015, we have Target. At least 100 million of credit cards was leaked. On 2016, we have a lot of things. We have the U.S. Election attack. We have the CNN attack. We have the Zine attack using something called Mirai attack. First attack using IOC to perform a DDoS attack into the DNS servers. And there is a lot of things. We have on 2017, 2018, we have shadow brokers. We have Eternal Blue. We have WannaCry. We have Emotet. We have NSA leaks. This year, for example, and that's something that happened actually this week, we have an attack from Nessus. Actually, here's a good example of something called supply chain attacks. Somebody or a group of hackers or somebody hack into Nessus, and on their supply chain for their computers, especially for the operative systems and software on their computers, install a malware. So each computer that came from Asus from the last 2, 3, 4 months could be infected with a malware, and that's why on the supply chain of the process to add software to install the operative system into the Asus machine, somebody implants a malware. So there is a potential risk here. If you own Asus machine, it's a good idea to contact your vendor, to contact your provider, and to run some antivirus software. And then we have some examples. Cyber attack using Swift. Swift is actually a bank protocol to transfer money. And here's a list of the millions of losses of the banks that they are having because attacks are exploiting this Swift technology. And it's not necessarily something that is related to the servers, to the implementation of the technology. It's something related to the identity thief, to the identity impersonation. A user could receive an email like this, let them know that they are receiving a transfer, or they are receiving an alert from their credit card holder, and they need to go into this link to upload or to update their personal information. With that information, an attacker could try to apply international transfers, international money transfer using Swift. And here's the report, for example, on of a bank of Ecuador, Banco del Austro, that loses almost $10 million on 2015 on these hacks, on these identity thief and data leaks. And to close this video, we will talk about the tools and attacks that those cyber actors are using. For example, the cyberverse for the U.S. election hacks used two tools called CDaddy and CDuke. Those tools were used to generate backdoors into the committee of the party to at least have access to emails, documents for at least 6 months. That's the number that some investigators are dealing with. Then we have the Black Energy. Those are Russian hackers. This tool is used to exploit vulnerabilities on SCADA or PLCs or ICS systems. That those systems are normally used on power plants, on nuclear plants, on water plants, things like that. And Ukraine was part of that attack on the 2016 and 2017 series of attacks from Russia. We have Shamoon, we have Dooku and Flame, we have Dark Seoul, and we have WannaCry. Those tools are used for criminals and sponsor hackers from governments to exploit not just infrastructure but also data and other information from businesses, personal information, and internet at all. Companies are normally targeted by these groups, for example, Google, Symantec, companies that have intellectual property that could be stolen or could be sold in the black markets. So that's all, I think, for these videos.
In this video, you will learn to describe the various attack classifications such as passive attacks and active attacks.
So let's move into security attacks. So let's move into attack classifications. One of the first attack classifications that we'll look at is the idea of a passive attack. Essentially, it's an eavesdropping style of attack. The methodology is there's a communications connection to the channel that we described earlier in Module 1. And here in the diagram, we see Bob communicating with Alice. And an intruder, in this case Darth, captures the message out of the communications channel, and this is undetected by Alice or Bob. So the benefits of this attack, obviously, since it's not detected by Alice or Bob, is that the eavesdropping could occur for a long time, for a very long time, right? And so they can actually get the content of the messages, right? The second class of attack for passive attacks is traffic analysis. This is an attack, a style that doesn't look so much at the payload, but the frequency and the size of the messages. One of the great examples of this is during an earlier presidential administration, a local newspaper was monitoring the number of pizzas that were delivered after 7 p.m. to the White House. And the correlation was between a large number of pizzas being delivered after 7 p.m. and events of a national security nature occurring the next day. So this is actually traffic analysis in its most basic form. Very, very novel way to do that. So one of the questions that you'll see here on the slide is, do you think passive attacks are hard or easy to detect? Well, they're hard to detect because the message from Bob to Alice meets our security criteria. So what do I mean by that? That the messages are authenticated. So Alice can prove that the message is in fact from Bob. The message can be pass an integrity check because Darth, our interceptor, is only collecting the messages. He's not changing them. So there's no evidence that the message has been changed. We see, certainly examples of proving that when Bob says to Alice, let's go to lunch at 1, and both of them show up at lunch at 1, and consequently there's no evidence that that message has been modified. The confidentiality of that, of course, is violated because our interceptor, Darth, now has access to the message. Now, whether it's encrypted or not, like I said, that's another question. But Alice won't have any evidence that Darth has a copy of the message. So, in fact, it actually passes that context. So you can see the perspective of how passive attacks are some of the most dangerous from an information or an intelligence collection process that can run literally for years before it's been detected. Active attacks. Active attacks obviously involve some modification of the data stream or the creation of a false stream and can actually fall into 4 basic categories: masquerade, replay, modification of the messages, and denial of service. So masquerade is intuitive, right? This is the masking of one entity appearing as another. So in this case, right, Darth would pretend to be Bob. He would intercept the message, read it. Let's go to lunch at 1, if that was the message. Send the message to Alice. Oh, how about 11:30? Is that better? Alice thinks it's Bob, reports to lunch at 11:30. So that masquerading is extremely dangerous within this context. We talked about the replay of these messages. So this can be used for a man in the middle attack, so that Darth would intercept the message from Bob, read it, act on that, and then send the unmodified message to Alice, let's say an hour later, with a correct timestamp, so that Alice receives the message and then acts on it, and it passes the integrity perspective because the message is not modified, fails the confidentiality because Darth has seen that, the integrity passes, message isn't modified, right? The authentication part fails, however, because this actually came from Darth, not Bob. No way to prove that. So, modification, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier, that the message from Darth could be, let's meet at lunch at 11:30. So that message could be actively modified. Once again, this is of great concern to the U.S. government. The messages are modified, reports are modified. Significant effort to ensure the integrity of that. And then fundamentally, the last one, of course, is the denial of service, where the message actually just never gets through. So active attacks, right, are the opposite in terms of characteristics of passive attacks. Passive attacks are difficult to detect. However, active attacks have measures that are available that we can actually get a sense that there's an anomaly. It's difficult to prevent active attacks universally, absolutely, because of the diversity of the style of attacks that come through with that. So that's so the goal here, right, is to detect the active attacks early and to recover from any disruption or delays caused by the attacks. So two major attack classifications: passive attacks and active attacks.
In this video, you will learn to discuss the various types of security services and the technical implementation of security policies.
And look at some security services in terms of security arc. Let's jump into the definition of security services. By the way, this security services and these attack classifications come from a great textbook called Network Security Essentials, Application and Standards, written by William Stallman. It's considered to be one of the classic books in the security repertoire. So I certainly would think that a sufficiently advanced security professional would have this textbook on their shelf. So let's talk about security services, right? So a service is a processing or communication service, right, that's provided by a system. This would be the enterprise, the IT infrastructure. It's designed to give a specific kind of protection to a system resource. Security services are technical implementation of security policies. We talked about access control in an earlier module with that, and the security services that implement the security policies are implemented by the security mechanisms. So in this context, the security mechanisms are the security enforcement points that we talked about in Module 1. A security service, enhancing the security of data processing systems and information transfers of an organization. So there's some nuances here, right? So we're going to improve, using security services, the business process of the enterprise. And we're going to protect the movement of information of an organization. So that means internal movement, database to server. It means external movement, for example, to a business partner. The purpose of security infrastructure is to provide defensive mechanisms against a security attack. So obviously security services are designed to enhance our ability to counter the security attacks that are presented against the enterprise. Security services can engage, and it's a one-to-many relationship between a service and a security enforcement point. This makes sense that a implementation of a technical policy can engage more than one element of a security enforcement point. So often replicates capabilities in the real world. So we think about how information moves securely. We've got signatures and dates, protection from disclosure. That's why we put things in an envelope. We make sure they're not going to be destructed or destroyed or modified. We can provide authenticity through notarization or witness signatures, plus the non-repudiation part of that can be accomplished from notarization or licensing. Takes a look at a couple of definitions, and he's pulled out one from ITU, right? The International Telecommunications Union. That's the United Nations governing body for standards worldwide. X.800, a service provided by a protocol layer of communicating open systems which ensures the adequate security of the systems or of data transfers. So, this means we think about the OSI protocol stack, right? Runs from applications to presentation sessions through the network transfer protocols down to the physical part of that. That these layers, right, communicate with similar layers. That's them communicating to open systems, right, in another enterprise or another part of the enterprise, and protects the information, both of the receiver, the transmitter, and the communication transfer that's in there. Now, kind of legalese, right? This request for comment 2828, another standard document that's maintained by the ITU, a processing or communication service provided by a system to give a specific kind of protection to system resources. More clear, to be sure. So, once again, that 2828, a little more clear, right? Talks about implementing the services that are implemented by the security enforcement point. Those are the specific kinds of protections and the implementation of the security policies. So let's dive into some definitions of some specific security services as found in the X.800 document. Now remember, we had talked about this a little bit earlier, that X.800 is an artifact of the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, which is not a workers' union, right? It is an association chartered and staffed by the United Nations to provide international standards for computer and network communications. Fairly solid document. So Stallings talks about 5 security service categories and the 14 specific services that are in there. So highlighted with these 6 elements right here. There's classic security services, which are traditionally discussed. Now notice that these things are written at a very high level. I like to think about them written at the level of the U.S. Constitution, subject to legal interpretation. So the top one, right, is authentication, is concerned with assuring that a communication is authentic. In fact, that it's correct from Alice to Bob, and that it is measurable, right? There's a subversion of this called peer entity authentication, which provides corroboration of the identity of a peer in an association. So that means Bob and Alice can authenticate each other. So Alice sends a message to Bob. And along with that goes, "Hi, Bob, I'm Alice." And Bob can read the message and say, "Yes, in fact, you are Alice." That is pure entity authentication. Data origin, right, is a corroboration of the source of the data, so that Bob can actually look at the message and say, "Yeah, so Alice actually sent that." So we can authenticate Alice and authenticate that the message had come from Alice. You can see those two powerful, powerful points of the authentication side. So access control, moving down the list, right, is the ability to limit and control access to host systems and applications via communication links. So this means in our context, right, computer networks, not front doors to houses and such, that the correct individuals are identified, they are authenticated, right, that their identification assertions are validated, and then they're authorized. So the 3 steps for access control. "Hi, I'm John." "Yes, you are John." Identification. Authentication is the affirmation of identification, and then the authorization is, "And you are approved, John, to do the following 3 things." So that is a role-based access control model. There's volumes of content that's out on the internet and within IBM about how to implement an RBAC or role-based access control system. So the third element, data confidentiality, right, ensures that the messages are received as sent with no duplication, insertion, modification, reordering, replay, or loss. So the loss part of that, right, is that the message is not destroyed. Reordering, right, so that if the messages are describing a sequence of events, that they come in the correct sequence. There could be a lot of disruption if those, in fact, are changed in that. The modification side, that the payload of the message is changed. This is the example of, let's not meet at 1 p.m. for lunch, but let's meet at 11:30. Insertion, no new modifications, and duplication, that we're not sending duplicate messages to confuse Alice or Bob. So the non-repudiation phase of this, right, is that the both Alice and Bob in a message transaction can't deny that the transaction occurred. We talked about this a little earlier about message transmission. Alice sends Bob a message. Alice can prove that Alice sent the message and Bob received it. Bob can prove that Alice sent the message and he received it. So there's no ambiguity area of not being able to authenticate a transaction. It's extremely important within financial services, both for banking and for insurance, that we need to be able to remove any capability of saying, "I didn't do that," right? So identification, authentication, confidentiality, all of that's in play with that. And we talked about availability a little bit earlier on this, that the resource is accessible and usable. So we talked about the availability, right? That the capability, the service capability being provided by the enterprise is available, that it's there, and that it responds in a timely manner. Because if you can think that if you put a response in and you got a response back the next day, that's not timely at all. So that is part of the availability part of it.
In this video, you will learn to describe security mechanisms and what they include.
Dive into security mechanisms for enterprise security. So Stallings tells us that security mechanisms are defined as the combination of hardware, software, and processes that enhance IT security. Once again, so we talked about the principle of the security enforcement point. This is a technical implementation of a security policy. The security policy is derived from the business policy. So the business policy describes what we're going to do, not how we're going to do it. The security policy describes how we're going to do it, and the security enforcement point or the security mechanisms are the technical implementation of that security policy. So that point is taken up with the second bullet point, right? That it's a security policy implementation mechanism or delivery vehicle. And some examples of those, right, are protocol suppression, for example, to turn off FTP. That a security policy would be no FTPs allowed. The business policy, no unauthorized large-scale data movements. So the security enforcement point would be to disable FTP. There's another example about the identification and authentication. We've talked about the three aspects of identification, of access control. Identification, authentication, authorization. Those are all services that are going to be employed. And once again, we talked about how security services are the tools for security enforcement. Pulling out of X.800, Stallings gives us a number of examples of security mechanisms. So cryptography, digital signatures, access controls, you can read the list. These are actual, like I said, once again, security enforcement points. And at the top end, just above each one of these security mechanisms is a controlling security policy. And once again, the security policy is a technical policy that is derived from a logical business policy. So that's the food chain. So business policies, security enforcement points, or security mechanism. So you'll see that list that goes in. Those are referred to as specific services. There are ones that transcend specific policies. Those are trusted functionality, right? How do we trust our internal users, our privileged users, right? Two classes of users. We have general users, privileged users. General users, that's you and me. Privileged users are somebody who can change a security policy. That's the difference between the two. And privileged users should have a lot of attention on their good behavior. So security labels, right, those are referred to generally data. When we think about security classification within the government world, there's secret, top secret, sensitive but unclassified. In the private side, right, there's confidential, extreme confidential, business-centric. All of those are security labels that are applied to data. And how do we use those labels? Access control, data movement, right? There's some models that describe how those are used. The most famous of which is the Bell-LaPadula model. So other pervasive security mechanisms include event detection, right? That is the core of QRadar and security intelligence, that we can detect that something happened. Now the question is that something different and of a high risk? So this is where it moves into the anomaly side. So security audit trails is also pervasive. This is the ability to collect security intelligence data and ensure that that security intelligence data is available, is protected from unauthorized change, right? And can be sent to the correct individuals. So there's an analogy with security audit trails and criminal chain of custody, which you can always prove who's got responsibility for the data, for the security audits, and what they've done to that. So extremely important in the forensic world. And then recovery is recovery and backup. which affects how we react or our response to a security event. So once again, we see some analogies between this and the NIST security model and the IBM security framework described in Module 1. Here on slide 15, we see an example of some security mechanisms or some security enforcement points. This is looking primarily at the access control policies. We see those security enforcement mechanisms implemented initially in the DMZ between the two firewalls. Good design principle is they are of different designs, right? So that if an adversary defeats one firewall, it does not have to simply reapply that attack against the second. We see credential management in the security domain, and within the security management, being able to acquire events, manage credentials, which those credentials consist of roles, permissions, and identities.
In this video, you will learn to describe various network security models.
Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of network security models so we understand mechanically, in terms of processes and in terms of logical decomposition, what we're looking to achieve. So let's talk for a moment about a generalized model for network security. And here on slide 17, we see an extract from the Stallings text about communication between a sender and a receiver. So this is Alice and Bob in our example. And they have a communication channel between them that is non-secure. And they need to wish to send a message that is protected, can be intercepted, has integrity components to this, has confidentiality components to that, and there's an availability part of the network. So what can Bob and Alice do? Well, obviously, we have the initial clear text message, and that's this element that we see right here from Alice sending to Bob. So sender is Alice, recipient is Bob. So the security-related transformation process is encryption, 99 times out of 100. So there's some secret content right here that is maintained, and the secret content is actually the encryption keys. So the encryption keys follow, allow the security-related transformation or the encryption of the message. And here is the encrypted or secure message right now. Alice puts this onto the information channel. Our adversary here can intercept the message, but because the adversary, Trudy, doesn't have access to the keys that are found here, will not be able to read this. Now, then Bob pulls the message off of the communication channel. So this message here is the same thing as this message here. Applies his key here. Now the keys can be the same or different. We'll explain that in a little bit later. But he's using the same encryption-decryption protocol that Alice is using, and then we have the clear text. So the message here is the same as the message there. Now that we have the generalized model plus the foundational concept described in Module 1 understood, let's start moving into security architectures and what it means to have an attack against a security architecture. So, quick review of what security means is that within X.800, right, which is that International Telecommunication Union document, part of the UN governance element on that, what is meant by security? That's actually used just simply in terms of managing the vulnerabilities and their exposure of risk to both assets and resources, right? So an asset right here, right, can mean anything. So in our context, that means the valuable information maintained by an enterprise. It also means the security enforcement point, right? That technical implementation of a security policy that, if it's disabled, increases the risk factor for the enterprise. So both of those are in play in terms of a security asset. So a vulnerability, Stallings and 800, says any weakness that can be exploited to violate a system or the information that it contains. In the actual lexicon of a security professional, a vulnerability is an undeployed exploit. We think about a vulnerability from a software manufacturer, from a security company, right? Is a backdoor. It's a window. It's a way that security policies can be circumvented and information can be stolen. Now, a vulnerability that's put into play is called an exploit. So a threat, right, is the potential violation of security. So we have a definition for security, and then the threats right here, right, are what we are protecting against. So look at security, architecture, and motivation. So 800 rather, right here, right, talks about the motivation for security in open systems. So let's define open systems for a moment. The absolute opposite of an open system is a proprietary or a closed system. Open systems need not be defined by standards. Most standards organizations move at a pace that only a geologist can appreciate. But those protocols, those interfaces are published to the open. This is IBM's approach to security and software systems. We are an open systems, not necessarily a standard. So CCIT, right, which is a group that comes out of that ITU, right, has a piece of rocket science here that says, we need to enhance security of open systems because of society's increasing dependence on computers that are accessed or linked by data communications, which require protection against various threats. So that's ground truth, right? The world's becoming more connected, needs more protection. So there's several countries that have increasing legislation, right, about data protection. The European Union comes to mind, safe harbor in terms of managing some of the risks that are associated with that. So the deliverer, let's use that rather than the term suppliers, the deliverer of a secure enterprise needs to take into consideration the risks and the legal ramifications of its systems. So, and this is some marketing from ITU right here, right? There's a number of standards, but open systems generally very, very popular and should be. So if we have security, architecture, and protective elements of that, one of the questions that we need to take a look at is what needs to be protected. So this is not rocket science. We've talked about this before. Obviously, the information and data, right, needs to be protected. This is the crown jewels of the enterprise: the customer credit card information, health records, bank information, all of the elements around that, including security measures such as the passwords, right? We think about the Yahoo breach where passwords were stolen. All of that is target, fair games for the adversaries. We also have the context of communication and data processes and services right here. These are the security enforcement points that we talked about earlier. Remember, security enforcement points are technical implementations of security policies that are derived from business policies. And we obviously need to protect against modification, destruction of our equipment and facilities.
In this video, you will learn to describe how the destruction, corruption, modification, theft, removal, loss, or disclosure of information or other resources, and the interruption of service can constitute threats to the security of data or systems.
But the threats, the sources that this can come from. So the threats to a data communication system, that's our enterprise, include these 5 elements, right? The destruction of information and or other resources. Think about denial of service. This is the predominant threat to large-scale information processing enterprises. So the destruction of information, by the way, also the destruction of our security enforcement points. Modification, we talked about the integrity side of that. Being able to modify a message in flight between Alice and Bob is a significant risk. Most people, including the government side, worry more about the modification than the corruption of that. The corruption can be detected. Modification, not so much, although we'll show you a mechanism a little later how to detect if a message has been modified. But we think about those passive attacks where systems, where the intruders listen and record the messages and transition into an active attack where a very slight modification of a message is executed. Very, very dangerous, can occur for a long time before people know it. So the targets, right, are primarily the theft of let's use the term critical information. These are the credit card numbers, the goals of the attacker. It also may be confidential or classified information on a defense network, right, is the theft and removal of that. So the disclosure of this information. Now this is sort of interesting from a perspective of confidentiality. So are the WikiLeaks documents, which have been released much to the government's angst over the last year, a disclosure of information? They absolutely are. Is that a threat to an IT enterprise? Yes. So I believe that the WikiLeaks ecosphere is actually a confidentiality violation. And of course, we also talk about the interruption of services. This is the availability side. Remember we talked earlier in Module 1 that we've got not only an availability parameter that a service is capable, right? Is available, but we also need to worry about the timeliness of that. That if we submit a response to a message and are expecting a response back, that it occur within a timely period. So on thefts here, threats. So threats can really be of 2 classes. So one obviously is the accidental threat. This is one without lack of criminal intent. The other is intentional threats, where there's an intention to violate a security policy. Now, from the security protection perspective, we do not care between the two of them. Whether an individual, a privileged user, has an oops moment or intentionally violates a security policy that impacts the enterprise, the result's exactly the same. So we do not differentiate much between these two. Now we'll create use cases that will help articulate our architecture, but from the result side, we don't differentiate much between those two. So be aware of the differentiation between accidental and intentional threats. So whether this is an intentional or an unintentional result is that if there's a response, there's an action by the enterprise, data moves out, privileges are reduced, some change in the state of the security ecosphere that qualifies as an attack. So this is where we've moved from a vulnerability where something could happen, the threat, to an attack or an exploit where something has happened. That's the transition right there. So we worry about vulnerabilities, what could happen. We react to exploits, what has happened. Once again, here's the differentiation between passive and active. Passive, extremely dangerous, long-term presence on the network, undetected by Alice, Bob, or any other user. One of our architecture slides speaks to an industry average of exploits, attacks being passively on the network for 284 days before detection. So one of the, like I said, difference between passive and active, there is a change to the state of the security ecosphere.
In this video, you will learn to describe how an action taken by a human with intent to violate security constitutes an attack.
Under the attacks on architecture, so let's begin with some definitional terms, right? Is that we will define an attack as an action by a human with an intent to violate security. So it doesn't matter, by the way, whether the attack succeeds, rather, whether the vulnerability is successfully transformed into an exploit. So the attack is the exploit. Whether it succeeds or not is somewhat academic. The attack has occurred. Now, there's intermediaries, right, obviously, between the human and the enterprise system. So there's protocols, proxies, but somewhere, somebody started the chain of events that results in an attack. Collins takes a look at the X.800 and describes various types of attacks. So we've talked about earlier about passive attacks. So we have one type of an attack, which is the disclosure side, which is the release of a message content. So this is revealed to unauthorized parties. This is the envelope being opened, the letter being taken out, read, and told to another individual. So if the interceptor, Trudy, intercepts a message between Bob and Alice and never reveals the contents of the message, that is not a disclosure attack. So it's the interception plus the reveal side of that makes for the disclosure side of that. So this is an attack on the confidentiality of the message. Stallings also expands out of X800 two forms of passive attacks. So we have traffic analysis or traffic flow analysis also. So traffic analysis, right, is not the revealing of the content, which we described on the previous slide. This is the being able to ascertain content about the sender's actions based on the frequency and the size of the message. So, for example, if we were able to ascertain that a lot of message traffic had been sent between a system administrator and a database administrator that was significantly above the normal level of activity, we could ascertain there's a problem with the data architecture. Perhaps there's a leak, a storage problem, right? But something that says this is above a threshold, and because it's above the threshold and who the sender is, who the receiver is, the types of message, the frequency, the size of them, the temporal aspects, right when they are sent, that we can actually derive content from that. So this also is an an attack on the confidentiality of the message, right? So that a third party is gaining insight into the sender's intent by the application of traffic flow analysis. So we talked about the masquerade attack, that we talked about the 4 styles of attacks earlier. This is the impersonation of a known or authorized user or a system. Interestingly, about or a system. So this could be, for example, Trudy pretending to be Alice and communicating with Bob. That's a masquerade. Additionally, it could be Trudy setting up a fake service appearing to be Google that Alice communicates with for the collection of passwords and usernames. Both of those are a masquerade end of it. So there's a failure here of authentication and identification. So in the Google approach, the service, the system that Trudy had created to impersonate Google, right, says to Alice, "Hi, I'm Google," and Alice moves on as if it was Google, when in fact it doesn't. So we fail on the identity phase, we fail on the authentication phase, that Trudy's fake Google system, right, spoofed, fooled Alice on the actual source of the server, on the service, and when Alice sends Bob, it's the authentication of the origin of the service that's in play.
In this video, you will learn to identify and classify the various forms of active and passive attacks.
The second style of an attack, from the Stallings end of it on the active attack, is that of the replay. So this is where a copy of a legitimate message is captured by Trudy, our interceptor, and retransmitted later. So this could be a message that was simply like, let's break for lunch, let's go to drinks, and instead of, it's intercepted, delayed, and then sent on Thursday. And Bob, receiving this message from Alice, thinking it's from Alice, in fact it is from Alice, just delayed, that lunch is going to be on Thursday as opposed to Wednesday. So you can understand now, in the context of financial services, how a delay in a message of complete this stock order, transfer this money, really impacts the mission of the financial service, the core mission capabilities about faithfully executing commands, executing orders from its clients. So it's a very big problem within those communities. So this is actually, not surprisingly, an attack on the integrity of the system. So it's an attack on the integrity because it's not sent in a timely manner. The actual message is legitimate. So this is transfer $100 from my savings account to my checking account. It's a legitimate message, but it's retransmitted at a later time. So this is the integrity failure. So we think about, has a message been modified, or has it been delayed? So we talked earlier about the attacks. The previous ones have been attacks on the integrity of legitimate messages, right? So those are delays, those are modifications. If we move ahead into some additional components for active attacks against an enterprise, one of the largest ones that is still in play, right, are denial of service attacks. So with a denial of service attack, Trudy, the opponent, is preventing Bob and Alice, the two authorized users, from accessing a system. And this could be their email system, text messaging, something in the communication channel. So it's preventing the authorized users, Bob and Alice, from accessing the communication channel to communicate. This is an availability attack because there's a timeliness factor. Alice can send Bob a message, may not be delivered for days on end if it ever gets there. So that's the timely part of it, and the accessibility part, whether the service is available at all as a function of time.
In this video, you will learn to identify and classify the various forms of active and passive attacks.
Let's now take a look at a couple of model descriptions for these attacks. So this is how life should work, our normal flow of information. So the information source in this context is Alice. The information destination, the receiver, is Bob. This is the communication channel described earlier, and what we don't see in here are the encryption capabilities. We'll get to those a little bit later. But this is the normal flow of information from Alice to Bob. So this is an attack that is an interruption of services. So Alice here, attempting to send a message to Bob, here has the message disrupted by Trudy, the interceptor, en route. So is this a passive or an active attack? Well, it's an active attack, right? Because Bob here will know that the message had not been received at some point, right? Alice will know that the message was never delivered. So by the fact that the two recipients, Alice and Bob, will have knowledge that the message was not delivered, it becomes not a passive attack, therefore it must be an active attack. And the traffic analysis phase of this is that Bob may say, hey, I used to get 10 emails a day from you, Alice, and now I'm not getting any. Right? Something's wrong. Right? So we don't know what the content is, but we know that the parameters surrounding the message delivery, right, in itself carries a message. This is an active system. So out of the four models that we talked about, masquerade, replay, modification, or denial of service, which of this? Obviously, the denial of service, because Trudy has simply stopped all messages from going through. At Trudy, getting into play right here on slide 32, so once again we have Alice sending a message to Bob, and Trudy is the interceptor, who is C right here. Now, the only thing that's occurring is that Trudy is making a copy of the message traffic moving from Alice to Bob. So the question here is that is this a passive or active attack? Well, I would argue that it's a passive attack because Alice sends a message to Bob. Bob receives a message from Alice. It can be authenticated. It makes sense. It can be, we can have some mechanisms in place to explain, to test for modification, and all of those pass. So it's a legitimate message. The only thing is that Trudy, the interceptor, has a copy of the message. So, given that, what is the effect of this, right? So it's, none of these are in play because it's not an active, but the potential for this is going to be disclosure from Trudy. A WikiLeaks dump, sending the copy of the email to the boss, whatever bad people do with copies of information between good people would come into play right there. Another attack is the modification phase. So once again, we have Alice, we have Bob, who are sending a message. Now notice this time that the message path does not go directly from Alice to Bob, but vectors down and goes through Trudy. So the opponent, that's Trudy, right, intercepts the message and forwards a modification of that message to Bob and appearing to come from the original source. So what kind of attack is this? Is it a passive or an active attack? Well, obviously, it's an active attack, right? So because Trudy is intercepting the message and choosing to modify that and send it along with it appearing that it had come from Alice. So is this a masquerade? Well, yes, right? So that she is Trudy modifying the message to appear to come from Alice. So Trudy is appearing to be Alice the sender. Is it a replay? Well, it could be. We never really talk about when it's sent. Is the message modified? It is absolutely modified. Denial of service? No, it's not. Now let's take a look at a fabrication model. So here, if you'll notice, Alice never sends Bob a message. She's sitting there minding her own time. She may be asleep. Trudy sends Bob a message. Let's go to lunch. This is Alice. So she is appearing to represent Alice in the context of this. This could also, be anything else. It could be a service. It could be your bank calling you up to say, hey, go change your password, and then we're going to put in place some mechanisms to intercept that password. So it appears to come from a legitimate source. So our questions again, passive versus active? Well, it's obviously active, right? And it is a masquerade because Trudy is appearing to be Alice in communicating to Bob. So this is a serious type of an attack because Kathy actually isn't doing anything. Alice isn't actually doing anything. And so from her perspective, there's nothing wrong. So now we have only one element, and because it appears to come from Alice, that awareness of the security attack may be delayed. Another denial of service. So in this one, once again, Alice is attempting to send Bob a communication, but Trudy intercepts this, prevents the transmission to Bob. And so what happens here, right? So Alice sends Bob a message. Trudy intercepts that. Alice thinks it's been delivered because in this case, there's obviously no message delivery verification. And so our questions about this being passive or active, right? It's obviously active because Trudy's taking an action which changes the state of the system. And so what type of an active system? I would view this actually as a denial of service because it's changing the state of the system and preventing a service from occurring. The service's message delivery does not occur, meets the definition formal for denial of service. And Trudy, because she's got a copy of the message, right, can then release this content to an unauthorized third party. So this is a dangerous style of attack.
In this video, you will learn to describe and define the term malware, describe the various types of malware, including ransomware.
Malware. Some of the questions that we're going to try to answer are, what is malware, types of malware, and how do we protect from it? The first thing that we're going to do is to define it. Malicious code or malware is any undesired or unauthorized piece of software running on a host either to disrupt operations or to use the host resources for its benefit. Recent malware attacks attempt to remain hidden on the host using resources for potential uses such as launching denial of service attacks, hosting illicit data, skimming personal or business information. Types of malware. There are many forms of malware out there with certain features. starting with a virus, which is a piece of malicious code that spreads from one computer to another by attaching itself to other files using self-replication. Note that they require human interaction to self-replicate. Due to its self-replicating nature, they are quite difficult to remove from a system. They also use other tactics to hide on the system, like polymorphic code, which encrypts and duplicates itself, which makes it a little bit harder for the antivirus to find. This is known as a polymorphic virus. Other category that it's an armor virus, which tries to shield itself by obscuring the true location in the system, and its code making it harder to reverse engineer to create signatures for it. Now we have worms. Worms are it's a self-replicating malware that does not require human interaction. Their main goal is to just spread and cripple resources or turn computers into zombies. Trojan horses, also known as Trojans, is hidden malware that causes damage to a system or gives an attack access to the host. They are usually introduced into the environment to a computer by posing as a vending package, such as a game, wallpaper, or any kind of download. Spyware. The main goal of spyware is to track and report the usage of the host or to collect data that the attacker desires to obtain. It can include web browsing history, personal information, banking information, any kind of files that the attacker wants to chase. Then we have adware. Adware, code that automatically displays or downloads unsolicited advertisements, usually seen on a browser pop-up. RATs. It stands for Remote Access Tool or Remote Access Trojans. RATs allow an attacker to gain unauthorized access and control a computer. Lastly, we have a rootkit. It's a piece of software that is intended to take full or partial control of a system at the lowest level. Now we have ransomware. We all hear about ransomware, but what really is ransomware? It's a malware that infects a host with a code that restricts the access to the computer or the data on it. The attacker demands a ransom to be paid to get the data back. If it's not paid in an amount of time, the data will be destroyed. On the right, we can see the banner where the ransomware takes control of the host, asking for payment with a timer. The most recent spread occurred in May 2017 with the WannaCry ransomware. If you wish to learn more on how to respond against ransomware attacks, please check the link. It includes topics such as how can you protect your critical information and resources, how to identify the specific variant of ransomware, and how to contain and remove the ransomware from the infected systems.
In this video, you will learn to describe other cybersecurity threats besides malware, describe botnets, keyloggers, logic bombs, and their components.
Now we will speak regarding other threats out there. So botnets are a set of compromised hosts that enables attackers to exploit those computer resources to mount attacks. This kind of tactic is used by black hat hackers in order to run operations such as sending spam, doing denial of service attacks, phishing, spyware, mine personal information, or cryptocurrency. The computers part of this botnet are also known as zombies or drones that await commands from a bot master or a bot herder. Other malware attacks. We have keyloggers. Keylogger is any hardware software that records every keystroke made by a user. We have logic bombs. It's code that dormants on a target until it's triggered by a specific event such as a data and time. When the condition is met, it detonates to perform whatever it was programmed to do, usually erasing data or corrupting systems. Then we have APTs, or Advanced Persistent Threats. Its main goal is to get access and monitor the network to steal information while staying undetected for a long period of time. Usually it targets organizations such as military, government, finance, or companies that have high value information. Some known groups that are out there are Fancy Bear of Russia, Lazarus Group of North Korea, or Periscope Group of China.
In this video, you will learn to describe how to protect systems against malware and cyber attacks.
We spoke about malware and the things that they do. Now let's talk a little bit of how do we protect against them. How can we protect? How can we protect us? We have technical controls. Technical controls are the hardware or software that aid into protecting the information, which may include antivirus, which scans files for executable code and matches signatures that are known viruses. We also have internal operation systems, internal detection systems, and unified threat management systems. Those are systems that can look for attack signatures in progress or indicators of compromise on the environment. Each implementation is unique and it depends on the organization's security needs. Then we have updates. With all the software deployed, we need to stay up to date to prevent creating new holes into our security. This is done by applying the security patches. Then we have operational controls, also known as administrative controls. They are put in place by management and depends on the staff on complying in order to be effective. One of those controls are policies. So policies, it's a written document issued by an organization to ensure that all its users comply with the rules and guidelines related to security. An example could be a password policy, which the enterprise requires a minimum of 15 characters with at least one special symbol. Then we have trainings. Training is to make sure the users of the organization are aware of its policies or threats out there. An example could be a social engineering training. How it shows the user how to deal with the social engineering attacks. And lastly, we have revision and tracking. Revision and tracking, it means ensuring that the items that we just mentioned stay up to date.
In this video, you will learn to describe how network mapping, or casing the joint, is used by bad actors, what commands are used, and what information is commonly gathered. Describe the countermeasures that can be used against mapping threats.
Now let's take a dive into specific security threats against internet-based enterprises. One of the first ones we'll take a look at today, here on slide 12, is the idea about network mapping. So this is basically casing the joint, where our adversaries will scan the network. They'll find out what devices are on there, what services, what protocols are on the network using ping commands, right? There's also other tools like nmap to determine what hosts are on the network and what their addresses are. Certainly port scanning comes into play, and we talked about nmap a little bit earlier, which is a network exploration tool. So one of the questions is, given this problem set of our adversaries scanning our network and looking for hosts and essentially getting the topography of that, what can we do? You can take a look at recording network traffic entering the network, looking for suspicious activity, IP addresses, ports being scanned sequentially. By the way, these are network anomalies that good seams like QRadar will be able to pick up and create an alert. We can also use a good host scanner, for example, as that found in QRadar, keep a good inventory of the hosts on the network. What would that do for us? Well, by good asset management, by the way, which is needed for patch management at a minimum, we can create a whitelist or a list of authorized devices by MAC address that are allowed on the network, so that we can, if there's additional activity and other hosts that get put on play, we will know this because it'll be a whitelist violation.
In this video, you will learn to describe packet sniffing and how it can be used to gather information about your network. Describe the countermeasures you can deploy to safeguard against packet sniffers.
Packet sniffing, which is another predominant internet security threat. So this is a broadcast style where it uses broadcast methods, for example, such as UDP. The network interface card, the NIC, right, by definition, reads all packets that are passed by when it's in the promiscuous mode. It can read all the unencrypted data so that if a password is sent in the clear, for example, like with Telnet, right, a NIC card that's in promiscuous mode will pick that up. We'll take a look at this diagram here on slide 14, and we see client B communicating with client A. The payloads, rather the field headers in the IP package talks about the source as being B, the destination being A, and the payload. Well, client C, running in promiscuous mode, will be able to detect all of that information. So how do we conduct countermeasures against this? One countermeasure for packet sniffing is that all of the hosts, all the computer clients, plus the computer network services like servers and routers and switch, run software that check periodically if that host interface is in a promiscuous mode. So as you can see, that NIC card promiscuous mode is the dangerous element for that, right? So, and basically we also have this set up that only one host per segment of the broadcast media, which is either switched Ethernet at the hub. So the diagram, once again, on the bottom of page 15 shows the threat and the opportunity for client C to pick up message traffic between B and A when it's in a promiscuous mode.
In this video, you will learn to describe how IP spoofing can be used by attackers, describe how ingress filtering can be used as a countermeasure to safeguard against IP spoofing and its level of effectiveness.
So the following security threat talks about IP spoofing. We talked about this briefly during the authentication phase in an earlier module, where one can generate fake bogus IP packets directly from an application, putting any value you want into the IP source. Remember Trudy masquerading as Alice. That was the technique used there. And the receiver, which would of course be Bob, can't tell if the source is spoofed. So we have a diagram here on page 16 that graphically expresses client C attempting to masquerade as client B in the source field of that packet. So how do we protect against this? Called ingress filtering. That talks about internal routers not forwarding up packets with invalid source addresses. These are datagram source addresses that are not in the router's network. You can't mandate that for all networks, so this is going to be, at best, a partial solution.
In this video, you will learn to describe how denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks are carried out. Describe how packet filtering and traceback can be used to help counter denial of service attacks and the shortcomings of these measures.
One of the major attack scenarios in the cybersecurity world is that of the denial of service, or DDoS. So this has to do with a flood of maliciously generated packets that basically swamp the receiver. They spend so much time handling the incoming packets that they have no time for other computationally intensive activities. There's single denial of service attacks. There's also distributed, which is DDoS, which talks about multiple sources swamping a receiver. The distributed attacks are resistant to single IP blocking, right? And we see that activity demonstrated in the diagram here on the bottom of page 18. So what's a countermeasure for getting out, right? Flooded packets before reaching the host, having a filter. But the problem there is that you're going to be filtering out solid and legitimate packets along with the bad. You could talk about the ability to trace back to the source of the floods, but this only applies against innocent and compromised machines. So the idea about dynamic filtering, being able to adjust as the traffic patterns are realized, plus the ability to intelligently filter out packets, will help reduce the effect of denial of service.
In this video, you will learn to describe how host insertions are used to compromise a network. Describe what measures can be taken to protect against unauthorized insertion of a new host on your network.
Host insertions, right? So the ability, once an insider threat, the ability to place a computer client on the network or a server on the network with bad intent. So this is actually goes onto the network hoping that it's not going to be detected and it can move on to its nefarious goals. These are done both as clients and as servers. So how can one protect against host insertions? Slide 21 talks about the idea about maintaining accurate inventories of computer hosts by MAC addresses. This is the fundamental technology behind asset management. Solid asset management is part of a larger governance program. It also applies directly to patch maintenance and vulnerability management. So the idea about a scanner, QRadar has a scanner internally that can generate very accurate inventories of computer assets on the network. So not just hosts, but all of this. Servers, the network criteria, all of those can be listed by MAC addresses. So with a constant or continual scanning capability, you will determine, the scanner will ascertain computer clients or hosts that are not on the whitelist. So missing hosts are okay. This is somebody where a system's turned off either for maintenance or it's a notebook computer that's off of the network. New hosts that are not on that MAC address whitelist, that's bad news, and that's when the red lights and the sirens go off. Some of the remaining security threats to keep in mind are that of the rogue software process. This is a software program, a software agent that has been inserted maliciously on the internal network. This can be inserted both by the internal and the external threat. Once again, a whitelist approach about being able to maintain a list of viable and legitimate software applications in the enterprise. A key part of a solid governance program will help identify unwanted and uninvited software processes in the enterprise. Once those are identified, right, a vulnerability management software can help eradicate those software processes. These generally are inserted onto a host, right, a computer platform, either a client or a server, intentionally. The other variation of this is that a legitimate software process is modified for evil purposes. So what would they do for this? Obviously, network traffic monitoring to be able to ghost or understand the network traffic patterns. So we talked earlier also in the first module about traffic flow analysis. Well, these are actually the tools that observe traffic flow and in turn ascertain and try to obtain intelligence or at least information about the enterprise given the way the traffic patterns are shaping. And additionally, this is also used for the exfiltration of sensitive data. We think about customer information, credit cards, but crypto keys also are a target for exfiltration.
In this video, you will learn to describe what a cyber kill chain is and how each link in the chain contributes to the success of an attack.
The kill chain, as I said before, are a set of activity that needs to be done to compromise the victim. Usually the kill chain is referred to the malware, but each single attack could have a specific kill chain. So we will see later, the SQL injection requires some specific activity that needs to be done. For what regarding the malware itself, those are the most common activities that needs to be done. So recognize signs, that means basically understand what are the vulnerabilities that can be exposed. Weaponization means identify what is the exploit. Things to WannaCry, for example, the WannaCry exploit was Eternal Blue. For delivery, I need to make sure that the malicious payload that I have created could be an application to ask for ransomware, could be an exploit of the vulnerability, but at the end of the story, there is something that needs to arrive to the target, and that is the delivery part. Exploitation is the activity to start the exploit of the specific vulnerability. So once the malicious payload is arrived, I need to exploit that specific vulnerability. Then, of course, I need to install some other components that are not necessarily malware, but are things that I know to start my activity. So if I need to crypt some data, you ask ransom later, I need to have on the target also a tool that makes a crypting of the data. This is not a malware because of, and by the way, this is something that is very important for malware in general. You will be surprised, but developing a malware is not illegal. It's very difficult to define what is illegal. Once you have a program that does something, the fact that the program does something not necessarily can be associated to a malware. Sometimes we create something that can be used by a good guy, but can be used also by a bad guy. So crypting a data in general is not something bad. But if you crypt a data and you ask ransom for that, at that point that goes to be illegal. That is also another particular challenge that we have in the defense. This is quite common. This is quite common for malware. Established a common control session. So I need to control the activity from outside, and that in the last families of malware, this is also something that is very much interesting, in the sense that very often my real objective is not to compromise the victim, but to use the victim computer to start as an attack to third parties. So this is by itself. So if I capture your computer data, and from your computer I perform an attack to the Martina computer. Okay, in this case, the real incident, if you want, are two. One is that I'm using your computer to perform attack to third party. The second, that I use your computer to store some data from the Martina. And finally, actions and objective. So once you have a command and control, you can perform something, encrypting data or installing the application for the ransom, request money, and so on and so forth. Another thing that I think that is very much interesting in this description is the fact that we think of the malware as something that has been created by one person to compromise another person. Each single of these activities usually could be performed by different organizations. Very often we talk about cybercrime as a service. So there are several organizations that are specialized in delivery, for example, through spam, through malvertisement, or there are people that are very well specialized in the reconnaissance space. So, understanding what are the vulnerabilities. It's nice to know that there are. I see more often companies that, in order to understand if their system are vulnerable or not, launch some specific contests that are called bug bounty is the right word. So basically, bug bounty is a sort of challenge that the company does to understand if there are vulnerability in their services. Actually, the same stuff is done by attacker as well, and so also attack very often launch contests in dark web to find some vulnerability that the attacker can exploit.
In this video, you will learn to describe social engineering and how it is used as an effective method of cyber exploitation.
So now let's talk about social engineering. Social engineering is actually pretty easy to understand. Question yourself, how could you trick somebody to do something that they don't want to do? And think it the good way. I mean, how could you trick somebody to give you her or his password? I mean, if you go and ask your friends to give him a password for a social network, probably they wouldn't do that because they understand that the password is something important for them to have privately or separated from the public information that they could give to somebody. So the question or the process to perform a social engineering attack is how could you trick somebody to give you something that is private? And this is something that we use normally on offensive security operations because when we try to exploit things from the technical perspective, in some occasions we deal with advanced firewalls, with advanced systems that will block all the attacks that we are delivering to the client or the victim network. So one of the easy way to perform or get information or try to exploit things inside the network of the client of the victim is try to gain information from the users, gain information from somebody inside the network that already have, for example, a password, a username to log in into a VPN system. So if you already have the URL, the external URL to log in into a SSL VPN system, but you need the password, you need the username for you to be able to log in into that remote system. The easy way to get that probably is a social engineering attack. Now, how could you perform a social engineering attack? That's actually pretty easy also. Again, this is something that you need to have permission to do that or to do it. There is a lot of tools over there that you could use. A tool that it's actually pretty easy is called Set Toolkit. Set Toolkit is something that came in Kali Linux, but you also could install on your system without any Linux installation or without any specific Linux distribution. But it's something that will have a set of tools. Is like said on the title is a toolkit where you can create, for example, fake websites, create or clone websites from public internet domains or private internet domains. For example, you can go and clone uh, external website from your client, from your victim, and with a couple of tweaks you could try to impersonate somebody, and that somebody could send an email using a phishing attack to a username inside the network, inside your victim network or your client network, and see if the user get or click on the link that you send and add all the credentials, write all the credentials on that user and password login, fake HTML, for example. So that's not all. I mean, the social engineering toolkit has a lot of tools. Actually, you could also spoofing spoofing voice calls. So that's something interesting for you to to test. Again, you need to have permission in order to try to exploit something from a client. I mean, you cannot do by any means any kind of clone a private website and try to phishing a set of usernames and try to get them to click a link and give you the credentials for any kind of systems. You need to have the permission for do that. But the important part here to understand is there is a lot of good tools. There is a lot of things that you can start doing to understand how could you trick somebody to do something that they shouldn't do.
In this video, you will learn to describe phishing and phishing campaigns, how they work, and how they differ.
Something else that you could do is start like something that we call a phishing campaign. And there is a lot of good tools. One that I normally use is GoFish. GoFish is an open source phishing platform that will give you a lot of tools, a lot of information to try to understand if your cybersecurity training program inside your company, inside your network, is something that it's adding value to the knowledge of the users. So a quick example here is, as soon as you start using the Go Phishing framework, you could start creating a campaign with a fake email, fake URL, and a fake HTML, and send that email to a set of users and understand if the user clicked the email, if they open the email, or if they add credentials into the fake URL, for you to understand if all the security awareness programs that you have on your company are good enough or sufficient for the user to understand what they shouldn't do if they receive a phishing email. So another example of social engineering is this YouTube video. It's something that we call phishing. In this video, you will see a girl talking with an agent representative from a telephone company, and she will try to trick the IT guy, the support guy from the telephone company, to add her as one of the contacts on her husband telephone plan. But there is a couple of tweaks here. There is a couple of things. Obviously, this is a quick example of a phishing attack. Phishing attack is something like phishing. So in phishing, you send a fake email with fake information in order to try for a user to give you something. In a phishing, you are doing the same, but you are not using email. You are using your voice. So that's why we call it phishing. So I recommend you to watch this video, pay close attention of the techniques that she's using in order to trick the user, the agent of the telephonic company, and basically try to understand all the different aspects of the social engineering process. You will need to have a certain skills in order to perform these kind of attacks, because obviously you need to have confidence, you need to have skills that will help you a lot when you are talking with somebody and try to manipulate somebody in order for you to get information.
In this video, you will learn to describe what is meant by cyber war and the online resources available to understand the global picture.
For this lesson, we will talk about cyber war. It's a link where you will find information regarding significant cyber incidents since 2006. So there is a good information regarding the current cyber operations delivered by countries or forces that allies with countries to execute cyber operations. So, for example, one of the interesting parts here in this infographic is the amount of cyber incidents per nation, even if the nation generates the incident or the nation receive the attack. So, for example, as you may see here, based on this information from this cybersecurity report, China performed during this year almost 100 Nate incidents where he deployed cybersecurity attacks. He received also, or the nation of China received also 25 incidents. But one of the interesting part here is United States. United States received 117 incidents during this year. So this is something important. Again, I'll also understand that United States deliver 9 incidents or create or generates 9 incidents during this year. So if you want to understand more about which incidents the countries receive or what are the cyber operations that the nations are developing right now, here's a lot of examples. So for example, this one in April of this year, Iranian hackers reportedly undertook and hacking a campaign against bank, local government networks, and other public agencies in UK. So the important part here to understand, first of all, is it says Iranian hackers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the government of Iran is performing the attacks. And this is something important because, as you may know, there is a lot of actors in the cybersecurity warfare here. Normally, we have the cyber operations from nations directly. So there is a cyber command on US, on UK, on China that will develop not just offensive but also defense security operations. But then we have like hackers hired by those nations to perform the attacks. So one of the things that we need to understand is when these kind of reports, or if you saw something or you see something on the news talking about cyber warfare or China attacking United States or United States attacking North Korea, normally, and that's the tricky part of the cyber warfare scenario, normally we are talking about groups of hackers that covers their operations using states as the false flag for their security attacks. So again, there is some interesting attacks here. Probably some of these attacks are, like I mentioned, generated by other actors that are not necessarily governments. But there is some actions that definitely are generated by governments. So, for example, this one in March of this year, Iran's intelligence service hacked into a former IDF chief and Israeli opposition leader Benny Gantz on his cell phone ahead of the Israeli April elections. So this is something that actually the Israeli intelligence detect, and they point all the IOCs, all the information that they collect to the government intelligence agency from Iran. So here is an example of one operation generated and deployed by the government, not necessarily deployed by the group of hackers. So that's one of the tricky parts of the cyber warfare scenarios right now. Again, you could go and download the full list, understand what is happening right now. There is a good resources on Amazon, for example, to understand a little bit better the cyber war scenario currently. So there is a good book called 0 Days. It's the history of it's actually also a film here, but there is a book, Countdown to 0 Day. This book will tell the story of Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a malware virus deployed supposedly by a nation to cause some destruction on the Iranian nuclear plant. So here is a good resource for you to understand the current scenario. Also, it's more like a story. So this Stuxnet malware happens 2007, so it's actually pretty old, but it's like the first major cyber attack from nation to nation recorded in the recent history on the internet. So that's a good resource for you to understand and take a quick look of this cyber war in these days.
In this video, you will learn to describe various resources available to you to help your organization protect itself against cybercrime and cybercriminals.
We started with the attack methodologies, but attack methodologies, of course, are something mandatory. That if someone wants to attack you, you need to understand what is the arsenal that the possible attacker has. But there are a lot of information that, of course, needs to be understood and digested very well. Here there are a couple of information that I would suggest to have a look, but there are many other information that you can go and start on the internet and search for it. Information is very much important. Every single day, usually I try to understand what is happening today, because this is something that is very much different from automation and security and cybersecurity in general. On automation, you can survive, you can stay alive, you can keep your competence and skill updated also without studying each single day. Cybersecurity, unfortunately, every single day people develop new arsenals that need to be very well digested, because if not, you cannot be protected by something that you don't know. Okay, so information, let's start with the cybercrime, or if you want, cybersecurity threat reports. In IBM, we have the X-Force report. X-Force is a report that is created by IBM Cybersecurity Research. So these three reports, I would say, are very trusted reports, and they year after year, quarter after quarter, for some of these books, there are updates that I would recommend to download and always keep in mind. Then there are also information that you can search that provide to you some much more personalized information. So, for example, in IBM we have Exchange, X-Force Exchange. X-Force Exchange is a portal, and this portal, you can query the portal with some specific IOC. So IP address, host name, hash file, email address, and you can see if this specific, and the X-Force will return to you everything that they know about that specific, IOC that you have queried. Also, IBM make available a portal that provides you in a cybersecurity report that is very much specific to the sector, to the industry, to the country that you are querying to. So, for example, you want to know how many, if SQL injection is used in Italy, okay, at that point you can ask a report, a specific statistic on this, and you can understand how this is important. I mean, if you need to protect your client or if you need to protect yourself, you want to understand if there are threats that are referring to that specific client, to that specific area. In that case, you can decide to spend this 1 cent in that particular area. So, if maybe, so for example, if you know that you do not, if you know that you do not have an LDAP, and if you know that SQL injection is not very popular in the south of Italy, why you should start worrying about protecting against SQL injection? Maybe you can invest something, this 1 cent, on totally different stuff. Also, something that I would recommend to use is the data breach report. So that basically provides you the information on how much it can cost a data breach on a specific client. This is not, this is not cast you to the exact data, but of course, I mean, this is something that you can use either in case of selling or in case of also decide on where do you want to invest your dollar. I mean, if you know that a data breach to your site can cost a lot of millions of euros, that maybe probably this protecting against that specific data breach is something.
Yes, sir. I completely understand, sir. Thank you. Let's go phone the FBI. I think we have a situation.
Hey, guys, are you seeing this on the firewall?
All right, team, we have a threat that's just been validated. Can you throw up a Class C block on that firewall? We want to test something. Yep. Yeah, I see it too. How many machines are beaconing?
Hold on, we're isolating the IP.
Where's this even coming from?
Well, as we said, Amy, they look to be the victim of a major data breach from a very sophisticated cybercrime group. It's hard to say if the hackers are still in the network. As of right now, we really don't know where the attack is coming from or who's behind it. So we've talked about the impact on the financial sector and Wall Street, but what about...
All right, everybody, let's go, let's go. It is out there. We need to make this a permanent block. So let's go, let's go.
I need some answers now.
James, come on. Come on. We got 60 seconds. You ready to go?
Honestly, guys, it doesn't get much worse. And from what we can see, it looks like they actually made changes.
In 3, 2.
The ramifications from this are going to...
We're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. Now, what I can tell you is that we've got a fantastic team that's working around the clock to resolve any issues that arise. And as soon as any information comes up, I'll be glad to give that to you in real time.
Hi, I'm Javier. I'm a cybersecurity engineer at IBM Security, and I've been with the team for about 4 years. I originally started as a network security engineer 10 years ago. When I come into work, I work closely with the Security Operations Center, reviewing cybersecurity incidents and making decisions to improve our detection capabilities. As part of my daily tasks, I work with threat intelligence a lot. I run exercises to review and understand attack and techniques like the ones described in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, for instance, and help with the integration of better tools to catch the bad guys. I'm very familiar with technologies such as SIEM, firewalls, IPS, resilient, machine learning, and others. And one tool that I consider crucial is SIEM, because it allows us to perform advanced correlation, threat intelligence integration, and it certainly adds great value to our operation. Thank you very much.